Well, hello and welcome. I appreciate all of your patience despite the flu. I'm finally feeling back to myself. And this will be a follow up on the hair follicle, and we're going to move forward, finish up on the integumentary system, and go into the skeletal system. As I sent out an earlier email as a reminder, when we get back on that Tuesday, students should have with them in case they have any questions, um, the notes on the integumentary system, but also we're going to finish up the skeletal system. That way you're ready for the March 1st exam number 2, which is scheduled on the Thursday, March 1st. As I was finishing up, I wanted to make sure that we were clear on the structure of the hair follicle. And you can see this is the site of hair production. Hair production extends from the epidermis into the dermis, okay? In scalp, interestingly enough, it extends into the hypodermis. And what you can see is epidermal and dermal components. The root, which is the hair plexus, this is a network of sensory nerve endings which surround the hair follicle and provide slight sensation if the hair is touched. Also, of course, you have the hair bulb, and the hair bulb is the deep end of the hair follicle. This is where you're going to have actually the generation of cells that are going to make up the actual hair structure, as well as the cells that will pigment the color of the hair. Now, jumping over to where I was, there's an interesting little amount of smooth muscle that's attached to the hair shaft. This is called the erector pili. When you have this activated, it will pull and tense, and so it will make the hair shafts stand on end. It will end up forming goosebumps, the little bumpies on the skin. It'll also raise the hair for warmth during cold or during fear. You've ever seen a dog when they're having a confrontation? I have 2 dogs, and we have to watch one of them because Tia is the dog that in the back of along the entire spinal column, you see this hair starting to raise up, and that's not a good sign. It's like, oh, okay, they're playing a little too rough, so let's cool it. But for humans, we don't have that, okay? We're sort of referred to, as Desmond Morris said in his book, we're the naked apes. So what is the purpose of hair that does exist? Well, hair does have some purpose. Today, we find that hair has the purpose that if the meager hair shafts around the skin, etc., raise up, they create sort of a warm barrier of air close to the skin. So it prevents it from heat from escaping as well. Now, with hair types, there is a very fine or thin hair called vellus, and then there is the terminal hair, which is much more coarser, thicker. On the hair, for hair location, body of hair of children and adult females is mostly vellus. The terminal hair is coarser, and it's found in the scalp, eyebrows, axillary, and pubic regions of both sexes. At puberty, though, males tend to develop facial and chest hair that is coarser. Now, regarding hair thinning, okay, this is controlled in part due to hormones and nutrition, as well as delayed action genes. One of the good examples of that, of course, is alopecia, which is the thinning hair that begins anteriorly and progresses posteriorly. Hairs change from coarse to vellus, and then they basically disappear. This is where we also get into the male pattern baldness, which is a sex-influenced, age-onset type of thinning of the hair and then eventually loss of the hair. And what happens is that the follicular growth cycle shortens. Hairs progress from coarse to vellus to absent. Now, there's a drug, minoxidil. You got to understand some of the history of that. It originally was for treating high blood pressure. And what happened was, men that were using it, it was found to stimulate the growth of hair. Now, this is the point, though. The growth only exists while the patient is using the drug. As soon as the patient stops, the hair loss occurs upon the ending of the drug use. So to help you to understand this, in the 80s, the insurance companies would not cover in any way, shape, or form the use of minoxidil for hair purposes, which they considered cosmetic. And so what some people would actually do, go to their doctor's, doc, I feel like I'm having high blood pressure, wink, 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 wink. And what they would do is they get a prescription, and the capsules they would split open and kind of just pat on their head. Now, this is where you get a little bit of input from me because of some of my experiences. I used to advise a lot of companies that are pharmaceutical. And there is a concept that occurs when the patent runs out on a drug, and that's called OTC. That means over the counter. It's basically prescription to OTC conversion. That's why you have a lot of drugs that were formerly just prescription only. Vagisil, minoxidil, ibuprofen, naproxen, etc. In other words, a lot of different drugs. The only thing that the FDA will never allow to be going from prescription to OTC is narcotics. Okay, and an example that we see today with our problem with in the society of opiates. But anyways, what eventually happened is, so companies that basically invested all this money into these drugs and wanted to maintain some market control and maybe even explore other uses of it, they basically would go to the FDA and say, look, we got all the safety data, we got all this other stuff, please, we'd like to convert it over from prescription to over the counter so that you can go into your CVS without a doctor's prescription and pick it up and pay and go. And minoxidil was one of those drugs that was allowed to do that. Let's move on to nails. Again, this sounds like a beauty salon, but you have to understand some importance to this. What a nail is basically a scale-like modification of the epidermis, and this forms a clear protective covering on the dorsal surface of the distal part of the finger or toe. It corresponds basically to hoofs or claws in other animals. Its function is really fine detail capability to pick up objects for scratching and things like that. You see, nails contain a hard keratin. It's similar to hair. The free edge is the extension of the nail beyond the bed. The body is the visible portion of the nail still attached to the nail bed. Now, the lateral nail fold, this is a lateral skin fold which borders the nail bed. The luna is the region of the nail that lies over the thick nail matrix, which appears as a white crescent. You can see that on the diagram there. The eponychium, that's the cuticle. It's the proximal skin fold which projects onto the body of the nail. The root of the nail, which is the site beyond the nail matrix, but it's still embedded in the skin. Now, nail matrix is the site for the actual nail cell growth. In other words, when you see the nail, all of that is dead cells. So as the nail cells are produced, the cells become heavily keratinized. The nail bed slides distally, in other words, away forward over the nail bed. Now, it is important to note this, that nail beds appear pink due to a rich bed of capillaries that are just right underneath. So it's a good indicator for blood oxygen levels. It's also the site that you notice a lot of pulse oximeters. These are devices that were developed that basically use a certain frequency of red light and bounce it through the nail bed to the capillary bed, and that gives you a lot of information. Mainly people think about it as oxygen saturation of the blood, but you can also get information like pulse, etc. And even if the person has heavy pigmentation in the skin, if you're looking for evidence of anoxia, you can see it clearly on the nail bed because that's a clear indication there. You're not going to get the pigmentation that's going to obscure the kind of cyanosis or anoxia that might be occurring, and thereby getting that bluish tint. I hope that makes itself clear. Now, let's get into skin cancer. And you notice A, B, and C there, and we're going to go over a few things, and we're going to go into burns. Okay, some of this is the burns information will be touched upon when we get into the lab. Not the first week that we get back. The first week we get back, we're going to be talking about tissues. The week after, we're going to be talking about skin. So, what's going on? Skin cancer. The crucial risk factors for non-melanoma skin cancer is overexposure to ultraviolet light via sunlight or tanning salons or tanning lights. UV damage acts on tumor suppressor genes. Now, we have actually genes in our DNA, such as P53. These will suppress any cells from going cancerous, the uncontrolled growth. Now, if they get damaged by UV light, you're going to have loss of function of these tumor suppressor genes, and the cells are going to start dividing uncontrollably, which is what we define as a cancer. Now, basal cell carcinoma, least malignant, most common skin cancer. Over 30% of all white people will get it treated in their time. The cells of the striatum basally are affected, and the treatment is usually surgical removal. If you look at individuals that come from some of the more sunnier states, Arizona, California, places like that, or people who have gotten a lot of tanning over their years, you will find that a lot of them end up having either precancerous lesions or the actual basal cell carcinoma, which is relatively easy to remove. A lot of places that it's very common to show up is on nose, face, forehead, things like that. Squamous cell carcinoma arises from the keratinocytes from the striatum spinosum. Usually the treatment is surgery, and in some cases they have to use radiation to kill it off. Now, melanoma, and you can see that on that lower one there, this is a serious one. It's cancer of the melanocytes. About 1/3 arise from pre-existing moles. This accounts for about 5% of the skin cancers. Recovery is very good if it's caught early. A lot of times the treatment will be surgery and in some cases immunotherapy. They've actually had some very remarkable work going on where they will actually take some of the cells, and there has been some research where they'll try to develop a vaccine. And basically what they're doing is they're vaccinating the body, teaching the immune system that anytime they see the melanoma cells, they are to be destroyed. And that revs up the immune system, and that will basically kill off any other metastasizing, meaning spreading cells from the melanoma itself. Now, there is an ABCD, or rule for detection of skin cancer. This is particularly used to detect melanoma. A, asymmetry. So if you take the two sides of the pigmented mole or spot and they don't match, so basically put a line through it, is there symmetry? Great. Asymmetry means loss of symmetry.